or post, and if they were under attack or in danger, they would carve a Maltese cross as a distress signal. White departed in late 1587, expecting to return within months, but events far beyond Roanoke would seal the colony's fate. England was preparing for war with Spain, and in 1588 the Spanish Armada threatened invasion, leading Queen Elizabeth to commandeer ships for defense. Maritime travel was restricted, resources were diverted to war, and White found himself trapped in England, unable to secure passage back to his family. 3 years passed before he could finally sail again toward Roanoke, carrying supplies and hope that he would reunite with his daughter and granddaughter. When White at last reached Roanoke Island in August 1590, his relief quickly turned into dread. The settlement was eerily silent, the houses had been dismantled rather than destroyed, suggesting an orderly departure rather than violent attack. Fences were gone, and the fortification had vanished. There were no bodies, no obvious signs of struggle, and most hauntingly, no people. Carved into a wooden post was the word sorrow, and on a nearby tree the full word CROATOAN. There was no Maltese cross. White felt a mixture of fear and cautious hope, believing perhaps that the colonists had relocated to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, where a friendly tribe had once lived. Yet storms and rough seas prevented further exploration, and despite his desperate pleas, White's crew refused to continue searching. He was forced to return to England, never seeing his family again, and he died without ever knowing what truly happened to the colony he had governed. From that moment forward, Roanoke became a mystery suspended between history and legend. Over the centuries, historians, archaeologists, and storytellers have proposed theories ranging from the practical to the fantastical. One of the most widely accepted explanations is that the colonists integrated with local native tribes, particularly the Croatoan, intermarrying and gradually losing their distinct English identity. Later reports from English settlers in the early 1600s mentioned native groups with gray eyes or European features, and some claim to have seen stone houses or heard stories of pale-skinned ancestors, though such accounts are debated and often unreliable. Archaeological discoveries on Hatteras Island have uncovered European artifacts, including tools and ceramics, suggesting possible contact or integration, yet none provide definitive proof that the entire colony relocated there. Another theory suggests that the colonists attempted to move inland toward the Chesapeake region, perhaps establishing a new settlement that later perished due to disease, starvation, or conflict with powerful tribes such as the Powhatan Confederacy. Some researchers have pointed to a site known as Site X, where English artifacts from the late 1500s were discovered, raising the possibility of a small group attempting to survive inland. Still, the evidence remains fragmentary, open to interpretation, and insufficient to solve the mystery conclusively. Darker theories propose that the colonists were massacred by hostile tribes, possibly in retaliation for earlier English aggression. Yet the absence of remains and the orderly dismantling of structures argue against a sudden violent attack. Environmental factors may also have played a role, as studies of tree rings indicate a severe drought between 1587 and 1589, one of the worst in centuries, which would have made agriculture nearly impossible and increased dependence on native assistance. Such desperation could have forced the Imagine standing on the edge of a silent island where the wind moves through tall grass and crooked wooden posts, where the ocean keeps whispering against the shore as if it is trying to tell a story that no one has fully heard, and imagine knowing that 400 years ago more than 100 men, women, and children lived here, built homes here, dreamed here, and then vanished without a single confirmed trace, leaving behind no bodies, no clear signs of violence, no desperate message. Scratched into stone, nothing except one strange word carved into a tree, CROATOAN. This is the story of the Roanoke Colony, often called the Lost Colony, one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries in American history. A tale that begins not with disappearance but with ambition, rivalry, fear, and the dangerous dream of building an English empire in a new and uncertain world. In the late 1500s, England was desperate to challenge Spain's dominance in the New World, and Queen Elizabeth I encouraged exploration and colonization as both a political strategy and a source of wealth. Sir Walter Raleigh, one of her favored courtiers, received a charter to establish a colony in North America, and in 1584 he sent an exploratory expedition that arrived along the coast of what is now North Carolina, encountering the Barrier Islands and the Algonquian-speaking native tribes who already lived there, including the CROATOAN and the CROATOAN people. The English explorers returned home with glowing reports of fertile land and friendly natives, painting the region as a place of opportunity, and soon Raleigh organized a colonizing mission. In 1585, the first group of English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island under military leadership, but tensions quickly rose between the colonists and the local tribes. Food became scarce, misunderstandings escalated into violence, and, within a year, the struggling settlers abandoned the colony and returned to England. This failure did not end Raleigh's vision, and in 1587 a new attempt was made, this time not as a military outpost but as a civilian settlement meant to build a permanent English community. Approximately 115 settlers, including families, craftsmen, and farmers, set sail under the governance of John White, an artist and cartographer who had previously visited the region and who hoped to create a stable, thriving colony. Among the settlers was White's pregnant daughter Eleanor Dare and her husband Ananias Dare. The plan was to establish the colony in the Chesapeake Bay area, but due to the ship captain's decisions and perhaps political pressure, the settlers were instead left again on Roanoke Island, a place already marked by past failure and fragile relations with local tribes. Almost immediately they faced hardship, supplies were limited, relations with some native groups were strained due to earlier conflicts caused by the previous colony, and survival depended on cooperation and careful diplomacy. Yet in the midst of this uncertainty, something hopeful occurred. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, and for a moment the settlement felt like the beginning of something historic and permanent. However, the colony was dangerously undersupplied, and as food ran low and anxiety grew, the settlers persuaded John White to return to England to secure additional provisions, a journey he did not want to make but felt compelled to undertake. Before leaving, he agreed on a plan with the colonists. If they were forced to relocate, they would carve the name of their destination into a tree. Colonists to disperse in small groups, seeking survival wherever they could find it, gradually disappearing into the landscape and the surrounding cultures. Over time, the Lost Colony became more than a historical puzzle. It became a symbol of vulnerability, ambition, and the thin line between survival and oblivion. Unlike later English settlements such as Jamestown, which left behind detailed records and archaeological traces, Roanoke exists in partial documentation, in letters, carvings, scattered artifacts, and unanswered questions. The silence itself is what makes the story so powerful. There is no final battle, no clear tragedy recorded, only absence, and absence invites imagination. Some legends speak of supernatural forces, of curses, of entire communities swallowed by the forest or the sea, but historians remain grounded in evidence, even when that evidence is frustratingly incomplete. What remains certain is that more than 100 individuals, including children like Virginia Dare, faced isolation in a foreign land, endured hunger and uncertainty, and then made a decision, whether to relocate, to merge, or to fight for survival, that erased them from the English record. The carving of CROATOAN stands as both a clue and a taunt, a message that suggests intention rather than chaos, a direction rather than despair, yet one that was never fully followed. And so Roanoke lingers in history as a moment frozen in ambiguity, a chapter that ends without conclusion, inviting each generation to search again, to dig deeper, to imagine the final days of the Lost Colony, and to ask the same haunting question that echoes through the centuries. Where did they go? As centuries passed and America itself was born from later colonies that survived where Roanoke did not, the mystery only deepened, because unlike a simple historical footnote, the Lost Colony became woven into national identity, a cautionary tale and a haunting origin story that predates Jamestown and Plymouth, forcing historians to confront uncomfortable truths about early colonization, fragile alliances, and the human cost of imperial ambition. In the early 1600s, when Jamestown settlers arrived and struggled for survival, some leaders such as Captain John Smith heard rumors from native tribes about English people who had lived and died inland, stories of settlements destroyed or communities absorbed. Yet political motives often shaped which stories were recorded and which were dismissed. The Powhatan Confederacy reportedly told Jamestown leaders that they had attacked and eliminated a group of English who had settled near the Chesapeake Bay, a claim that, if true, might explain the disappearance of at least part of the Roanoke group, but solid proof never surfaced, and the landscape itself changed over time, with erosion, storms, and shifting coastlines potentially swallowing physical evidence. Modern archaeology has attempted to untangle these threads through careful excavation, carbon dating, and forensic analysis, and in recent decades researchers have re-examined John White's original maps, discovering hidden markings beneath patches of paper that may indicate a planned relocation site inland, suggesting that the colonists could have split into multiple groups, some moving to CROATOAN Island while others traveled westward towards safer territory. Artifacts, such as English sword hilts, pottery fragments, and writing slates have been uncovered in various locations across North Carolina, fueling debate about whether they represent trade goods, scavenged items, or remnants of the Lost Colony itself. Meanwhile, environmental research has strengthened the drought theory, revealing that the late 1580s drought would have devastated corn harvests relied upon by both native tribes and the English settlers, creating competition for food that could easily lead to tension, forced migration, or desperate alliances. Imagining the final months of the colony requires stepping into their uncertainty. Supplies dwindling, crops failing, relationships with neighboring tribes strained yet necessary. The memory of John White's promise to return growing fainter as months turned into years. Perhaps community meetings were held in rough wooden houses lit by firelight, debates about whether to stay or leave echoing against crude walls, some arguing that waiting meant starvation while others feared venturing into unknown territory. Eventually a decision was made, deliberate enough to dismantle structures and carve a destination into wood, suggesting organization rather than panic. If they did relocate to CROATOAN Island, they may have sought refuge among allies who shared food and protection, and over time their English customs, language, and clothing could have blended with Algonquian traditions, their children growing up bilingual, their European identity fading into a hybrid culture that left little written trace. Alternatively, if they attempted to reach the Chesapeake, they may have encountered hostility from tribes wary of English expansion, leading to skirmishes, capture, or gradual assimilation under less peaceful circumstances. History is filled with examples of small, isolated groups disappearing not through dramatic catastrophe but through slow integration, intermarriage, and adaptation, leaving behind genetic and cultural echoes rather than clear documentation. In the 19th and 20th centuries, amateur historians and local legends added layers of speculation, claiming descent from the Lost Colony among certain Native American communities or pointing to family surnames and physical traits as evidence, though such claims are often difficult to verify scientifically. DNA studies in modern times have attempted to trace possible connections, but the passage of more than 4 centuries complicates definitive conclusions. The physical environment of Roanoke itself has also shifted dramatically, with parts of the original settlement site possibly submerged due to coastal erosion and rising sea levels, meaning that key evidence could literally lie beneath the Atlantic. Storms, including hurricanes common to the Outer Banks, may have destroyed or scattered traces long ago. Yet the mystery persists not because of a lack of effort but because each piece of evidence opens multiple interpretations. What makes Roanoke uniquely haunting is that it represents the vulnerability of early colonists before the machinery of empire was fully established, before reinforcements and supply chains could ensure survival, when a small group of families stood alone on the edge of a vast continent they barely understood. It also reflects the complex relationship between European settlers and native populations, challenging simplistic narratives of savagery or civilization and instead revealing a world of negotiation, mistrust, cooperation, and cultural exchange. Perhaps the most rational explanation, and the one favored by many modern scholars, is that the colonists fragmented, some joining the CROATOAN, others attempting inland settlement, their numbers dwindling through disease and hardship until they were indistinguishable from surrounding communities. If this is true, then the Lost Colony was never truly lost, only transformed, its descendants living on in ways unrecorded by English chroniclers. Yet without definitive proof, the human mind is drawn to darker possibilities. Secret massacres, hidden fortresses, or entire communities wiped out by forces unknown. Popular culture has amplified these ideas through novels, plays, and television dramas, sometimes portraying the disappearance as supernatural. But the real story, grounded in historical context, is arguably more powerful because it is plausible. It is about ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances, facing decisions that determined not only their own survival, but how history would remember them. John White's heartbreak adds a deeply personal dimension to the mystery, as he spent the remainder of his life haunted by uncertainty, never knowing whether his granddaughter Virginia Dare survived into adulthood, married, or perished in childhood. Her symbolic status as the first English child born in America turned her into a legend, with later myths claiming magical powers or tragic fates. But at the core of these stories lies a simple truth. She was a child born into instability, dependent on the fragile success of a colony that vanished. The word CROATOAN endures as the final voice of the settlement, not a scream but a direction, not chaos but intention, and that subtlety is perhaps the greatest clue. It implies that whatever happened was chosen, at least initially. The colonists were not erased overnight but moved, adapted, or were absorbed into the living fabric of the region. Modern excavations continue, and each new discovery is met with cautious optimism, yet scholars acknowledge that the complete answer may never emerge. History does not always preserve neat endings. Sometimes it leaves us with fragments, and Roanoke is one of those fragments, suspended between documented fact and imaginative reconstruction. When visitors stand today on Roanoke Island and watch the sun set over the water, they stand on ground that once held hope, fear, determination, and uncertainty, and they confront the same silence that greeted John White in 1590. The Lost Colony challenges us to accept ambiguity, to understand that exploration carried profound risks, and that not all stories conclude with clear triumph or tragedy. Instead, some fade into the margins, leaving behind a carved word on weathered wood and a question that echoes through generations. Perhaps one day new technology, deeper excavation, or an overlooked document will offer clarity. But until then, the disappearance of the Roanoke Colony remains an open chapter in history, a reminder that the past is not always fully recoverable, and that sometimes the most haunting mysteries are those grounded not in fantasy, but in the fragile reality of human survival. The wind still moves across the outer banks, the ocean still erodes the shoreline, and beneath the sand may lie answers waiting patiently, while the legend of the Lost Colony continues to capture imaginations, inviting each listener to step back into 1587, to picture families standing beneath tall pines, debating their fate, carving a single word into a tree, and walking away into uncertainty, leaving behind one of the greatest historical mysteries ever recorded.